Welcome back to my channel. I hope you all are doing very well for yourself. Today I'm going to speak on the famous Tandoor case, or the Naina Sahani murder case. This was the case which was a watershed moment for forensic science investigation, and since I received a couple of queries yesterday, I thought I'll make a video on the entire case. Now, this case is not just important from the point of view of forensics, but also, or criminal investigation for that matter, but also in terms of how the Supreme Court actually commutes a death sentence into life imprisonment, and what was the aggravating or the mitigating circumstance as far as the commutation of the sentence was concerned. However, let me just very quickly take you through the entire case, and I hope you'll understand the nitty-gritties of the criminal investigation which was involved, and how the honorable courts undertook those evidences into consideration. The case goes back to 1995, when in one of the patrolling that two policemen were doing around Ashok Yatri Niwas in central Delhi, they heard a cry of a woman screaming, the hotel is on fire, the hotel is on fire. So they actually rushed to the location, and they realized that there was some fire which was coming out of a tandoor which was there in a restaurant called as Bagia, which was a barbecue restaurant. Now, this place, when they reached, they realized that there was no phone which was working, and the phone booth was closed. So one of the police constables actually rushed to the nearby post and informed the officers there that there is fire in the hotel. When he came back, he realized that there was a person, one of the accused person, who was putting in more wooden logs inside the tandoor, and he said to him that, why are you putting more wooden log? Because this is going to put definitely the entire hotel on fire, so it's best that you stop it. He said that I'm burning some pamphlets and banners, and therefore I will not stop it. Soon a few more policemen arrived, and they tried to douse the fire. The moment they doused it, they realized that there was a woman's dead body which was being burnt. The owner of the restaurant was standing pretty close by, near the gate, and was pointed out by a couple of people that that person happens to be the owner of. Now, the accused person was the same person who we will later on find out was the mastermind behind the entire murder that took place. So interestingly, they took out the body out, and they realized that the leg was amputated, and there was they realized that it was a body of a woman who was probably in her late 20s or early 30s. Once the body was brought there, they took it to the nearby hospital for investigation, and the first round of post-mortem was conducted then. So the following day, early in the morning, the police recovered a Maruti car which belonged to the accused from central Delhi area, and they discovered some dried blood inside the dicky, and also a few strands of hair. The accused actually fled from the area of incident, and later, after many days, he was found in Bangalore. Earlier than that, he had actually taken an anticipatory bail from Madras Sessions Court. However, the Madras High Court had then rejected that anticipatory bail. Upon the accused coming back to the city, and then going to the flat where the accused and the deceased used to live as husband and wife, because they had married each other, and very few people although knew about the fact that they were married to each other. They recovered a .32 bore revolver which was recovered, and some cartridges were also recovered. So from the place of incidents, there were some bullets which were found stuck on the ply in the wall, and also on the floor beneath the carpet, and also some live cartridges were recovered, as well as some spent or fired cartridges were also recovered from the place. When the forensic report was derived of these bullets, and also the cartridges as well as of the revolver, it was all matching up with each other, and therefore it was completely ascertained that the same revolver was used for firing these bullets, as well as the live cartridges which were recovered from the place of incidents. So the blood-stained kurta was recovered at the behest of the accused. A second post-mortem was conducted, and where X-ray examination was done of the skull area, and bullet marks and bullet was present in the skull. The second post-mortem very clearly gave the report that the death was caused due to coma induced as a result of antemortem injury caused by the bullet. I think for any criminal lawyer, what is interesting is to note through the judgments exactly what was the defense's case in this entire matter. The defense obviously started by refuting the fact that the accused person was never present over there. The plea of alibi was taken, and it was informed that the accused was actually traveling to Tirupati for good 7 days, and he was never available in Delhi. However, there were so many independent witnesses who came and deposed, saying that the accused was present at the spot, and some 6 to 7 witnesses, independent witnesses, identified his presence over there. Also, what else could have been the defense's grounds? And they said that the bullets which were there, they did not match the ones that were recovered. They also took the plea that in the first post-mortem report there was no mention of any bullet injuries, and why is it that it is only in the second post-mortem report the bullet injuries are seen? Why is it that in the first round of post-mortem no x-ray was conducted? Also the fact that when the body was taken to the hospital, the casualty medical officer said that he did not see any bullet shot injuries, and that probably the police planted the bullets in the skull. All kinds of confusion was created. The board of doctors who were appointed to conduct the post-mortem, their report was completely refuted. There was also an argument which was pressed that if there were so many rounds of gunshots, there were some 10 rounds is what has been said by the prosecution, then why is it that the neighbors did not hear any of these gunshots? Or why was it that no blood was found on the staircase or inside the place of incidents? Or also the question that in the dicky of Maruti, was it really human blood or was it blood of animals? So many questions and a lot of confusion was created as a result of the defense's grounds that they had taken. However, interestingly, the court goes ahead and deposes of all of these arguments which were made forward, and then says that the Honorable Supreme Court in its judgment, which was delivered by Justice Ranjana Desai, one of the very finest judges in the criminal side, then goes ahead and defines that an attempt was made to create confusion and cast doubt on the procedure of the second post-mortem, and to refute the reports of the board of director. However, she goes ahead and discusses that definitely the conviction under 302 had to be upheld based on all the circumstantial evidences which were available, which completely pointed on the accused in his role as far as this murder was concerned. However, the interesting part that we have to see as criminal lawyers is that what did the Supreme Court say as far as death sentence was concerned? And the defense had put in their arguments saying that they wanted the fact that the accused had remained in jail for a very long time, nearly 18 years, and the fact that conviction had taken place in 2003, and the accused knew that he was to be hanged, and the death sentence was already pronounced. Justice Desai, when she discusses about the mitigating circumstances, she writes in her judgment that when the accused went to Lady Hardinge Medical College in the mortuary, he started to weep the moment he sees the dead body, and she says that this definitely showed that there was remorse in the accused's heart. Also, she says that it is not that the accused was a hardened criminal or a history cheater. And then she says that because he was an only son and had infirm parents, that giving death sentence would not justify, and that it was not the rarest of the rare case. And then she goes ahead and says that looking at Sangeet versus state of Haryana, she says that there is a tendency that people think that life imprisonment basically means that after 14 years or after 20 years you'll get your remission and you'll be out. That is not the right way of looking at it, because life imprisonment means that you will be confined into your jail cell or into your jail till such time that you breathe your last breath. She says definitely that under section 432 CRPC, procedural checks have been mentioned, and under section 433A CRPC some substantive checks have been mentioned, and that every time a remission is done, these procedural and substantive checks should be relied upon, and subject to that, she then finally grants this commutation from death sentence to life imprisonment for the accused, but subject to section 432 and 433 and its applicability. So that's about it from me today on this very interesting case. I hope you are able to understand a little bit of what criminal jurisprudence and of course definitely about forensics here. You must read this judgment. I will try and share the link in the comment box below. Thank you so much for watching my video today. I hope you will like it and subscribe to my channel, and if you have any queries, do feel free to write to me. Thank you so much and good night.